So you've heard the greatest albums ever made. You know OK Computer, you know Loveless, you know the Blue Album. But what happens when genius bands, I mean legitimately brilliant, world-changing bands, completely shit the bed and release something so catastrophically bad that even their most devoted fans pretend it doesn't exist? Welcome to the graveyard of legendary reputations. These aren't just bad albums. They're extinction-level events for band legacies. The musical equivalent of watching your favorite professor drunkenly karaoke WAP at a faculty mixer while their spouse films it for evidence in divorce court. Let's discuss the disasters. Weezer, Raditude, 2009. Rivers Cuomo was 39 years old when he wrote a song called I'm Your Daddy. Let that sink in. The man who once poured his soul into Butterfly was now writing lyrics about being in the mall and featured Lil Wayne, yes, that Lil Wayne, on a track called Can't Stop Partying. Raditude is Weezer's worst album and a legitimate contender for worst album by any major artist in the 2000s. The production is so glossy, it sounds like it was mixed inside a plastic bag filled with corporate synth presets that came free with a Dell computer in 2007. The lyrics read like they were written by an AI trained exclusively on rejected Hannah Montana scripts and text messages from your divorced uncle trying to be cool at the grocery store. That girl got hot? Really, Rivers? At 39? And it's phrased like it's a scientific discovery, like he'd broken the code for pop songwriting. One reviewer called it, by far, the worst album ever released by an artist I claim to love. And honestly, that's generous. Another described it as having no heart beating inside these plasticized tunes, which is the polite way of saying it sounds like corporate focus-grouped garbage designed to appeal to nobody except people who think T-Pain's auto-tune was the greatest innovation in human history and that Lil Wayne needed a Weezer collaboration to stay relevant. The sad part is that Weezer had already proven they could make great music again, with Make Believe just 4 years prior. Which means Raditude was a deliberate choice to make the worst possible version of themselves while presumably getting paid discrete amounts of money to do it. It's what happens when a band forgets why anyone ever gave a shit in the first place and decides to chase TikTok trends a decade early. Green Day, Father of All, 2020. Billie Joe Armstrong was 48 years old when he decided that what the world needed was a 26-minute album where he sang in falsetto about rock and roll while dressed like a discount glam rock cosplayer in a music video that looked like it was directed by someone who'd never heard of Green Day before. Father of All is Green Day's least punk album ever, which is impressive considering they spent the entire 2000s trying to prove they weren't actually punks anymore. Father of All, full title, Father of All Motherfuckers, as if excessive profanity could mask the lack of substance, is the result of Green Day realizing they had one more album left on their Reprise Records contract and deciding to use it as a contractual obligation rather than an artistic statement. The album clocks in at under 26 minutes, not 26 minutes of brilliance, 26 minutes of confusion that sounds like Green Day trying to impersonate everyone from Prince to the Black Keys to literally any band they'd heard on classic rock radio hungover. The lead single, Father of All, features Billie Joe singing in falsetto over a beat that sounds like 80s Prince if Prince was trying to sound like he'd given up on music entirely. Meet Me on the Roof sounds like a rejected track from a children's album. Stab You in the Heart is literally, and this isn't exaggeration, a note-for-note copy of Heidi Heidi Shake, just faster and worse. It's plagiarism masquerading as homage, theft masquerading as tribute. The tragedy is that Green Day had proven they could do interesting things. American Ideal was a masterpiece. Ambitious, political, sonically adventurous, Dookie was legendary. They had range, they had ideas. Father of All proves that sometimes a legendary band's final contractual obligation is less an artistic statement and more a cry for help disguised as glam rock experimentation.
It's not a disaster album in the traditional sense. It's a nothing album. It's so forgettable that you forget you're listening to it while you're listening to it. And that might be worse than catastrophic failure. Oasis, Be Here Now, 1997. Imagine the most hyped album ever made. Not good, hyped. We're talking pre-release expectations so massive that the hype itself became the album's primary antagonist. In August 1997, Oasis released Be Here Now. And in doing so, they didn't just make a bad album, they killed an entire cultural moment. By 1997, Oasis had already proven themselves capable of genuine brilliance. Definitely Maybe, 1994, was a revelation. Swaggering, anthemic, captured something about British confidence and American rock ambition. What's the Story, Morning Glory, 1995, was even better. More refined, more produced, still brilliant. The Brothers Gallagher were the biggest band in Britain, possibly the world. And then, Britpop, the entire genre, started showing its age. Be Here Now was released with apocalyptic expectations. Pre-orders broke records. The album would debut at #1 in the UK and #2 in the US. It sold 745,000 copies in its first week in the UK, the best-selling album of 1997. And critics, initially, loved it. Rolling Stone called it a masterpiece, NME praised it, everyone was on board. Then, very quietly, critics started changing their minds. Not because the album had gotten worse, it hadn't, because they'd realized they'd been trying to make up for What's the Story, Morning Glory's lukewarm initial reviews with excessive praise. The album was bloated, self-indulgent, production-heavy to the point of suffocation. At 71 minutes and 33 seconds, it was one of those albums that confuses length with substance, believing that if you make something long enough, people will mistake it for important. The best comparison came from Rolling Stone's famous line, "A concept album about how long all the songs are." That's not a review, that's an epitaph. Every track seems to drag on for 8, 9, 10 minutes, stretching songs that had maybe 3 minutes of actual content into sprawling monuments to Noel Gallagher's cocaine intake. The problem wasn't the songs, it was the presentation. Noel Gallagher was still a decent songwriter, but he was making choices that made every song sound like it was fighting for space with 6 other songs playing simultaneously. Liam Gallagher's vocals were buried under production so heavy, it's a miracle they made it through. The whole thing felt like a band that had lost perspective, that had been told they were geniuses so many times they'd stopped listening to anyone. Rolling Stone later revised its assessment, calling the album a disaster. Critics who'd initially praised it quietly adjusted their positions. The narrative shifted from masterpiece to the album that killed Britpop, and once that narrative took hold, it couldn't be stopped. Within months, Be Here Now had gone from greatest album ever made to the moment British rock culture stopped being relevant. But Oasis didn't kill Britpop. Britpop was already dying. The album was just the first major casualty. Blur had already moved on to experimental new sounds. Radiohead was getting weird with electronic elements. Pulp was fragmenting. Be Here Now didn't end the movement. It revealed that the movement was already over and nobody had the courage to admit it. The saddest part, the songs are actually great. Some of them, Stand By Me, Don't Go Away, The Girl in the Dirty Shirt, I Hope, I Think I Know, they're as good as anything on Morning Glory. But they're buried under so much bloat, so much overproduction, so much more that you have to actively excavate them. And most people aren't willing to do that. And the B-sides, they're even better. Going Nowhere, Stay Young, My Sister Lover, absolute classics without the bloated production. But they're just B-sides. Be Here Now is what happens when a band believes its own hype, when a band confuses commercial dominance with artistic direction, when a band thinks bigger and longer equal better. It's also a masterclass in how critical consensus can shift based on a few influential reviews deciding to backtrack. Oasis never recovered. They limped along, got worse, broke up in 2009, reunited in 2024 to a legendary reunion tour, but they've never recaptured the magic of those first 2 albums. The Pixies, Indie Cindy, 2014. Kim Deal leaving Pixies should have been a warning sign. Kim Deal not being invited back should have been a giant flashing neon sign reading "Abort Mission." But Black Francis, Joey Santiago, and David Lovering pressed forward anyway, releasing 3 EPs that were eventually compiled into Indie Cindy, the band's first album since 1991,
a 23-year gap that might as well have been a centuries-long hibernation. The result? An album so underwhelming that even hardcore Pixies fans struggle to remember a single song from it. And not because they're forgetful, because there's literally nothing to remember. It's like if someone asked you to describe the taste of beige. Indie Cindy is what beige would sound like if it had a recording contract and studio access. One review summarized it perfectly. Everything about Indie Cindy, from its haphazard inception to the underwritten songs that populate it, reeks of laziness. The mixing is terrible. Joey Santiago's guitar work, which should be front and center, doing weird things that inspired every shoegaze band ever, is buried so deep you need archaeological equipment and a treasure map to find it. The songs sound like a tribute band doing their best Pixies impression rather than, actual Pixies. Bag Boy tries to be provocative and just ends up uncomfortable in a way that suggests maybe don't revisit this one. Greens and Blues is so tame it makes elevator music sound like punk rock rebellion. Spin wrote that it will go down as a bad failure when it's in fact a pretty good one, which is the kind of backhanded compliment that tells you exactly how disappointed everyone was. The band that invented Loud Quiet Loud dynamics, that influenced Nirvana and Radiohead and basically every alt-rock band that mattered, had released an album that sounded like they had forgotten why they ever mattered in the first place, like if Picasso suddenly decided to just paint beige rectangles for a decade. The worst part? They followed it up with Head Carrier in 2016, which was slightly better, but still felt like a parody of their earlier selves. Sometimes legends just stay legendary. Sometimes a reunion is the worst thing that can happen to a legacy. And Indie Cindy is Exhibit A in the case against the 2010s nostalgia industrial complex. Sonic Youth, NYC Ghosts and Flowers, 2000. In July 1999, Sonic Youth had most of their gear stolen during a European tour. Irreplaceable guitars, custom effects pedals, instruments they'd been using for decades, gone. Like their entire sonic identity just vanished on a tour bus somewhere between Prague and Berlin. Most bands would have taken this as a sign from the universe to maybe take a break, reassess, get their shit together. Sonic Youth decided to record an album using whatever they could find lying around and instruments held together with duct tape and prayers. The result was NYC Ghosts and Flowers, an album so difficult and unrewarding that even Sonic Youth fans, people who enjoyed their most abrasive moments, who had sat through hours of feedback-drenched noise rock, couldn't defend it. Pitchfork gave it a 0.0 rating, not a typo, 0.0, the lowest possible score ever awarded on their scale, reserved for albums that don't just fail, but insult the very concept of music itself, and make you question whether sound waves are even worth experiencing. The reviewer later recanted, admitting he'd been too harsh, which is generous code for "I was so disgusted I couldn't even properly articulate the disgust." The album's filled with spoken word passages that sound like bad poetry readings performed by someone who discovered postmodernism at a community college and confused opacity with profundity. The guitars sound less like musical instruments and more like construction accidents, and not in the charming, beautiful way of their earlier work, but in a way that went very far up its own ass, trying to double down on everything challenging about Sonic Youth for the sake of profundity being profound. One fan described it as a mess of noise and experimental sounds that pushes even the most devoted fans' tolerance levels to their absolute breaking point. Another said it was lazy and tossed off, with the added context that even the band seemed to not care what was happening. The songs average 5 to 7 minutes, but feel way longer when you're actually listening to them, like each minute expands into an eternity of regret. The tragedy is that Sonic Youth were masters of controlled chaos. Daydream Nation is a masterpiece of noise rock brilliance where every atonal scream serves a purpose. But NYC Ghosts and Flowers isn't brilliant chaos, it's just chaos, the musical equivalent of watching someone have a complete nervous breakdown in a guitar center while security tries to figure out whether to call an ambulance or just let them continue. R.E.M. Around the Sun. R.E.M. without Bill Berry was always going to be tricky. Berry was the drummer, the band's editor, the guy who kept everyone focused, the person who understood what worked and what was self-indulgent rambling disguised as artistic experimentation. When he left in 1997, the band carried on, and suddenly, everyone understood why Berry's role had been so critical. He'd been the guardrail preventing them from driving completely off a cliff. Peter Buck later described making the album as being kind of like the war in Iraq. We don't know why we got in there, we don't know how to get out, and we don't know what we're trying to accomplish. He also said it wasn't really listenable because it sounds like what it is, a bunch of people that are so bored with the material that they can't stand it anymore, which is the most brutally honest assessment of your own album ever recorded. Like admitting to your therapist that you actively hate yourself. When your own guitarist publicly admits the album is unlistenable in an interview, you know you've got problems that go beyond mixing issues or production choices.
The songs are slow, plodding, lifeless. Buck's iconic guitar playing is barely present, almost as if he was intentionally phoning it in. And Stipe sounds checked out, like someone who realized halfway through recording that he had somewhere more important to be. Mills later admitted they lost focus during recording and should have just finished it quickly instead of tinkering for months, which translates to, "We spent way too long staring at our navels and forgot that songs are supposed to have energy." Critics were brutal. AllMusic said the songs were sturdily constructed but bland, lacking musical and lyrical hooks, like watching someone build a house out of cardboard. Pitchfork called it dry, sapped of most personality, which is the critical equivalent of saying your album tastes like unseasoned chicken breast at an airport terminal. It's R.E.M's lowest-selling album, the first not to be certified gold or platinum by the RIAA, and the only truly rotten release in their 31-year career. The saddest part? They knew the album was great before they spent 6 months playing with it and ruining everything. Buck admitted the rough mixes and outtakes were just weird and fucked up, and it would have been cool if that record had come out. In other words, we had something, we fucked with it, and now it's ruined. It's like taking the Mona Lisa and deciding it needs better lighting, so you paint the whole thing over, and now there's just beige where Da Vinci's masterpiece used to be. Pixies, Indie Cindy Extended Edition. Okay, wait, I need to come back to this one because it deserves extra punishment. The reunion of the Pixies in 2004 was supposed to be triumphant. They were finally proving that the band that inspired grunge and modern alternative rock was still relevant. And then they spent a decade just existing, playing the same set lists, not recording anything new until 2013 when they decided that, yes, actually, they should record an album together. Indie Cindy 2014 feels like a band checking boxes. Yes, we recorded an album, check that off the list. The problem is that by 2014, the nostalgia industrial complex had moved on. Grunge had been revived and revived and revived again, shoegaze was back, Pixies worship had been so ubiquitous that an actual Pixies album felt unnecessary, like going to a restaurant only to discover that the food is worse than the ads. Black Francis's vocals don't have the ferocity they once did, Santiago's guitar work is workmanlike at best, and the whole thing feels like a business obligation rather than a creative collaboration, which, to be fair, it probably was. The Pixies knew people would buy tickets to the reunion tour regardless of whether the new album was good or not, so why strain themselves? Indie Cindy proves the terrible truth about reunions. Sometimes bands should stay broken up. Sometimes that pristine legacy, Surfer Rosa, Doolittle, Bossa Nova, is worth more than any new material could ever be. The best thing a legendary band can do is nothing. Exist in the past. Let people remember you as you were, not as you have become. The pattern. The thing about these albums is that they all follow the same trajectory. Great band makes masterpieces. Then something breaks. A member leaves, the band gets older, they lose focus, they start chasing trends or overthinking the process, and suddenly, a legendary band releases an album that embarrasses their legacy. Weezer's Raditude was pure, cynical cash grab, directed at audiences that didn't exist. Pixies' Indie Cindy was a reunion nobody needed and nobody asked for. Sonic Youth's NYC Ghosts and Flowers was a band refusing to admit that they needed to start over. R.E.M's Around the Sun was perfectionism without the perfection, overthinking and refinement applied to songs that shouldn't have been refined in the first place. The worst part is that these disasters prove that even genius-level musicians can completely lose the plot. Sometimes the best thing a band can do is not make an album. Sometimes the smartest decision is to go into a studio with songs you're excited about and then listen to your instincts rather than spending months polishing and tinkering until everything sounds like focus-grouped pablum designed to offend nobody. But ego, contracts, and the belief that we can fix it in post lead to disasters that tarnish otherwise pristine legacies. It's like watching your favorite actor take a role in a commercial film and realizing that sometimes the work that made you love someone is more important than any new work they could possibly create. And honestly, in an age when artists can test material on streaming platforms and gauge reactions before committing to release, the fact that these bands confidently released albums they knew were subpar feels almost admirably stubborn. Terrible, yes, but admirably catastrophically terrible in a way that's almost endearing when you think about it. A commitment to artistic disaster that only a truly established band could afford. These albums are monuments to failure. And sometimes, failure is the most honest thing a legendary band can offer.